welcome to Spotlights. It's the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. As usual, I'm your host, Sam Mickey, and this week I'm really happy to welcome onto the show Paul Koberstein. Paul, thanks so
Good
much
morning.
for being here.
Good morning, Sam. It's great to be here, and I'm glad to talk to you about forests and whatever's on your mind.
Yeah, a lot's on my mind. I've been enjoying your work a lot. You reached out relatively recently after seeing a wonderful episode we did with Tyler
Hmm.
Nelson about this idea of living Earth community, and your work couldn't be more relevant to the kind of stuff that we're doing in that regard. And so, anybody who doesn't know you, you're a award-winning environmental journalist based in Oregon. And so, shout out to the West Coast, right? I'm here in Northern California. And you have this wonderful book that came out, oh, a couple of years ago, and Canopy of Titans, The Life and Times of the Great North American Temperate Rainforest, that you did with Jessica Applegate. And looking at the description of the book, I was like, okay, this is a cool book. And then it didn't hurt. They had some wonderful endorsements from folks like Elizabeth Colbert and Bill McKibben. I'm like, oh, okay, something's going on here. But before we get into the book specifically, I'm always curious to talk to journalists because it's a different world. Like I'm an academic and always kind of have a little envy for journalists because people read things that you do, whereas academic stuff sometimes is a little beyond the reach of an average readership. Um, so I'm wondering how you got into journalism and specifically why environmental concerns. And sometimes, I mean, that could go back to early childhood or something, who knows? But I'm always curious how people get into environmental work at all, and then why that specific approach to environmental work, because you could have been like an environmental scientist or an environmental lawyer.
Well, first of all, I think we have enough lawyers. Thank you. Yeah, early childhood, I remember hiking and camping with my family in a place called Brightonbush, which is south of here, up in the Cascade Mountains near Mount Jefferson, east of Salem. And I fell into the river one day, and um, one of my favorite spots. But I fell in the river, and I remember my father pulling me out, saving my life, pulling me out by my ankles. I've always had a connection with forest, and I love the smell and the feel of being in the forest, hiking in the forest, canoeing in the forest, doing all those things. And um, so I went to journalism school at the University of Oregon, and it was always in the back of my mind that my journalism career would take me somewhere into the woods. And I lucked out. I got a job at the Oregonian here in Portland. And fairly soon enough, I got assigned to environmental stories. And I just loved it. And did a bunch of reporting on the fate of the forest at that time in the 1980s and early 1990s, which was going through a really intense transition from where it was being used as basically fodder for the timber industry to a more enlightened point of view that took into account the needs of biodiversity and people and recreation. Today, it's coming full circle. It's become recognized as important to the climate. Forests store carbon, and they do it quite well. And we, of course, have too much carbon in the air. Forests take it out of the air and keep it. If you let them continue to grow, don't cut them down. Forests can retain the carbon for centuries, and they play a huge role in stabilizing the climate by doing that.
Yeah, I think there's so much focus on fossil fuel production, and like rightly so, but I feel like a lot of the climate discussion doesn't really pay as much attention to trees, especially old growth, as they really should be. And so I appreciate that that's kind of the angle you're coming from. And of course, us on the West Coast and a lot of places around the whole world, wildfires have been so devastating in recent years. So I know that's got to be hitting you, pretty close to home, quite literally.
Well, certainly when we were writing this book, it hit close enough that um, in 2020,
Mhm.
a series of intense wildfires hit the state of Oregon around Labor Day, and the air in Portland was just unbreathable. It just hurt to even go outside. Um, but I do want to say that about fossil fuels, of course, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. We hope to prevent the climate from getting worse. Um, but we have this problem of all the carbon we've been emitting over the last few centuries, and that's still up there.
Right.
And forests are really good at removing carbon from the air. Um, One of the big revelations of our book of Canopy of Titans was that we came to the realization that even if we completely stop burning fossil fuels, that won't be enough to solve the climate crisis. We needed to do more. We need to take care of this old legacy carbon, which is actually responsible for the rise in temperatures, rising sea levels, melting glaciers, all the impacts of climate change that you are experiencing as a result of all this
Right.
legacy carbon. Forests can take care of that carbon if we allow them to by not cutting them down, protect them, nurture them. So forests are really, really a key underrated aspect of the climate solution.
Yeah.
And one of the things we hope to do with our book was to increase the spotlight on forests to give them their due and as a solution, a natural climate solution, as it's called.
Yeah. Which is a very different approach that you're taking from the thing that you see way too often, where people are all about doing tree plantings. It's new trees. And sometimes I've even heard of cases where old growth forests get cut down to make room to plant new trees so people can buy their little carbon offsets and things like that. But in the book, you and Jessica are really sticking up for old growth because they have a stronger potential for sequestering carbon.
Yes, they are. First, let me just give a shout out to Jessica, who did a great job as my co-author in researching, writing, editing, first-rate editor. And this book would never have been done without Jessica's help. And I really appreciate what she did. Sadly, she could not be here today, but her works, speaks for itself. And I just want to say that. The other thing that comes to my mind is that you hear a lot of people say, well, we can invent our way out of this problem. We can invent a carbon capture technology that can take care of all this legacy carbon. We don't have to do anything like protect trees or, forego driving our cars and so on. And that's just a bunch of bunk. Um, ExxonMobil and Chevron and the U.S. government, many others have been pouring billions of dollars into trying to find a technology that can capture all this carbon. And I'm here to tell you, it's just not working. Um, the best they can do is remove 1/10 of 1% of annual emissions of carbon from the air, which is
Right.
not even a drop in the bucket.
Yeah. Yeah. That's terrible. Especially, I mean, I'm pretty close to Silicon Valley here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the amount of people who have that just irrational optimism about these technological solutions is always, always upsetting, especially because there's this other technology that we already have called trees. And
Called trees.
forests are already doing it.
Well, forests have been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. Protecting forests, sequestering carbon in forests is not something that a bunch of tree huggers dreamed up last week. I mean,
Right.
forests have been doing this. They've been stabilizing the climate for forever, as long as we've had trees. They've
Yeah.
been doing this. They take the carbon out of the air as carbon dioxide. They keep the carbon. They spit out the oxygen, then we breathe. That's why forests are called the lungs of the planet. They really are because they perform this incredibly important service to us by, maintaining oxygen in the air. But they also remove carbon dioxide, which is, causing air temperatures to go up and all these other things. So
Yeah.
um, there's no substitute for carbon for trees um, with regard to this service. It's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and speaking of that phrase, the lungs of the earth, uh, I hear that a lot when people talk about the Amazon rainforest. People always talk about the Amazon, and they will refer to that particular rainforest as if that alone is the lungs of the earth. And it's one of the things I appreciate in Bill McKibben's endorsement for your book. He kind of mentions, there are other rainforests. And in particular, what is it, about 2,500 miles on the west coast from Northern California up to Alaska? We have the Great North American Temperate Rainforest. So I wonder if you could kind of lead us through the specificity of this amazing forest.
Right. So yes, the Amazon, we can't understate the importance of the Amazon to the climate because it's vast. It stores an enormous amount of carbon, but per acre, it's not particularly carbon dense. This rainforest you just mentioned on the west coast of North America, and I would give it a name, I'd tell you the name, but it really doesn't have a name. We call it the Pacific Coast Rainforest, but there's no official name. And it starts just north of San Francisco and goes all the way to the Gulf of Alaska, goes through Northern California's redwoods, Western and Oregon and Washington, British Columbia, Southeast Alaska, where we have the Tongass, all the way to the Gulf of Alaska. This enormous rainforests that line the coast up and down the coast, but they're all connected. They're all one real big ecosystem. They share the same tree species for the most part, although the Northern California region has dibs on the redwoods, but for the most part, the tree species, the conifers, the Douglas fir, Sitka spruce, the hemlocks, as well as salmon. I mean, this region
Mm,
is home to the world's largest salmon runs. Used to be 45 million salmon spawning in the rivers of this rainforest, and now they're down to 1 million.
wow.
And so that's the other part of this problem is that we've exploded this rainforest to death. We've cut down 80% of the old growth uh, for the most part. In the redwoods, we've lost 95 or 96% of the old growth.
Wow.
Um, and it's had a huge effect on the climate. Um,
Yeah.
Cutting down all this forest that we did over the last century has emitted more than 1 gigaton of carbon into the air, which is contributing to global warming, of course.
Right. Right. Yeah. That is just
Let
crazy.
me just finish that thought, though. I meant to. I had a point, didn't make it. Sometimes it happens. So the Amazon, as I said, is not particularly carbon dense. This rainforest has 3 to 6 times more carbon per acre than the Amazon, which is a
Wow.
big important point because for the buck, for the dollar, you're going to
Yeah.
do more for the climate by protecting an acre of this rainforest than any other forest in the world. And there's a reason for that. These trees are huge. They are the tallest trees in the world. Many of them are over 300 feet tall. They've actually been measured over 400 feet. Those 400 footers have been cut down long ago, but um, there's no underestimating the size of these trees. Um, they store many times more than the Amazon, and protecting it um, would go a long way in defending the climate, which is another big point of our book.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And one of the reasons I think Canopy of Titans is such a compelling title, because when you understand the size of these trees, it really is a canopy of Titans.
Well, you are coming at this issue from a spiritual and yes, religious point of view, and I got to say that when I think about forests, and a lot of people think about forests, these old growth forests, these tall timbers, they compare them to cathedrals, and which is
Right.
a religious metaphor. But so you're surrounded by this incredible grandeur, the tallest trees on earth, and the most carbon dense forests on Earth. It's the world's largest temperate rainforest. There's other temperate rainforests lining the coast of South America and Chile, Patagonia, Southern
Hmm.
Australia, Kamchatka, and Russia, Far East,
Hmm.
and little remnants in England and Ireland and Scandinavia, even in some of the Slavic countries. But this is the largest temperate rainforest. The temperate rainforest is a forest outside the tropics.
Right. Yeah. I think there is kind of I don't know, stereotype is the right word, but if you just say rainforest to somebody, they think tropical rainforest first.
Well,
And
yeah,
that's not the whole story.
yeah, even scientists are guilty of this.
Hmm.
There's a group called the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the UN's, United Nations Scientific Authority on Climate, and for decades they emphasized protecting tropical rainforests, and that is absolutely fine. They need to be protected.
Right.
They ignored the massive amount of carbon in temperate rainforests and the opportunity they would have to protect the climate by protecting these forests as well. And
Hmm.
they're only recently begun thinking about that. In a paper they wrote in 2022, for the first time they said protecting forests is essential. All forests around the world is an
Hmm.
essential part of the solution. You know, our book talks about the problems, the logging, overlogging that's been being done, the destruction of forest and habitat and so on. But it's also got a very hopeful message that protecting forests can actually do so much to improve our climate and to improve our quality of life and for not just humans, but all species.
Yeah, I really appreciate that kind of hopeful tone. Especially as somebody I teach courses on climate change. And that stuff can really wear on you, not to mention my students. And it can seem so desperate and so impossible. And then when you see things like this, it's like, oh, wait, we kind of have a lot of the solutions we need right in front of us right now. And forest protection is one of them. And so anything that can give hope to present and future generations I really appreciate, especially when that hopeful answer is also something as beautiful and majestic as forests. It's like it's such a win-win. If you protect forests, good for the climate, good for biodiversity, also good for recreation because we get to enjoy their beauty. So it's a very hopeful note.
One other thing the forest is that water quality. Much of the drinking water we get comes from the forest. You know, in San Francisco, for example, the
Hetch
Hetchy
Hetchy, yeah.
reservoir is up in the Sierras, surrounded by these grand, majestic sequoia forests, and so the forests deliver water for us to drink. One other thing, though, is that you'll hear false solutions that we, as you mentioned,
Mm,
let's plant trees and why don't we um, capture our carbon that way? Cut down the old trees and plant new ones. The new ones are fast growing. Why not do that?
right.
The problem is that the trees that you plant today aren't going to sequester very much carbon for decades, or even it's a century. Um, there's been papers that say, well, let's plant 1 trillion trees,
Right.
and there are 3 trillion trees, according to one paper. Um, and that paper and the math behind it has been thoroughly debunked. Um, the ancient Chinese once said that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. And the next best time is today. But in our book, if you want to do some time traveling, the best time to plant a tree was 1,000 years ago.
Right.
And the best thing you can do today is save a tree. And that gets to
Nice.
our point.
Yeah.
Protecting trees is a really, really essential climate action. The most important thing you can do is to protect a tree.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people are working on this. There's a number of groups in Oregon. They go by the motto, defending forests is defending the climate. And that really is
Mm.
true.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that. I like that kind of update on the old Chinese proverb. That's a really good one. I need to remember that. That's well, along those lines also, there was this word I hadn't heard before, which is embarrassing because I'm supposed to know all the words. But Proforestation, really
Yes.
powerful concept.
Yes. It's a new concept. It was coined about 5 years ago by a professor at Tufts University in Boston, Professor William Mumma, who actually was a Nobel laureate, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007 when all the climate scientists were recognized for their work by the Nobel Committee. But Bill, and I talked to Professor Mumma a number of times. His idea was, well, we have reforestation, which means to plant trees after you cut them down, or afforestation, which is planting trees where they didn't exist before.
Right,
But what are you going to call protecting trees? And he came
right.
up with this word proforestation. And it might sound a little wonky, but to us, it really did hit the nail on the head. It really describes we need to protect forests, not just plant them,
Yeah.
protect them.
I appreciate it because sometimes having a term for something can really make a big difference. Because especially, people's attention spans aren't that great right now. And so sometimes just having a word to kind of get people thinking out of the box a little and thinking a little bit more in their planetary context. So sometimes
Well,
a new word really helps.
we in our book we point out that this rainforest doesn't have a name either,
Right. Yeah.
and people might have more of a closer connection to this rainforest if it had a name that could relate to it, something they could put on a bumper sticker or on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Save the Amazon. Everybody, associates that with protecting the forest. Um, there's no real um, similar word for this forest, and there should be.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. Reading your book a little bit and kind of studying up, because I try to go into these interviews at least a little bit prepared,
Hmm.
but studying up, and it was just like, oh, I didn't realize that this was just considered some loose collection of a variety of forests. That there's no term that shows the continuity that this is this 2,500 mile long journey of temperate rainforest. So yeah, very strange to me that there's not a name, and I appreciate you guys bringing attention to that.
And we call it the where the forest has no name in one of our chapter titles.
Yeah, yeah, so strange, and especially, I mean, I love the redwoods in Northern California, and they mean a lot to me just personally. And so realizing that for some reason the community of ecologists or botanists, people doing forestry, that somehow this is just not getting a name is just so strange to me. Even your point that the IPCC even was just focusing on protecting tropical rainforests for so long. I'm like, what is it about this area that's not getting the attention it deserves?
I think part of that problem is that the timber industry has a real hold on this forest,
Right.
and they don't want to see it being used for anything other than producing timber. Um, they have convinced a lot of people, a lot of policy makers especially, that the best place to store carbon is in lumber and plywood and not in a forest. And that is just completely untrue. But of course, it serves their interests. And we're not saying that we should stop logging, we should stop using wood
Right.
products. I mean, we're always going to need wood for shelter. I mean, trees give us so many things: shelter, food, medicine, recreation. I mean,
Yeah.
so trees are hugely important to life on Earth, but there are so many different ways and things that they can do, and one of them is to protect the climate.
Right. Well, on that note, I think one of the things that's very, I mean, again, you do like investigative journalism. The way in which the lumber industry kind of abuses science in a way that influences government, I found to just be such a complicated knot. And so you untangled that very well, because they're happy to kind of make things sound kind of sciency. And then
Hmm.
the lumber industry gives that to the government. The government go, well, okay. So what's going on with this collusion between the lumber industry and policy?
Well, I think that the timber industry has developed a high level of expertise at the fine art of greenwashing.
Hmm.
and they have managed to persuade politicians and academics um, that as I said, it's better to cut a tree down, cut a forest down, and put the carbon into lumber. The idea that the lumber will be stored there. I mean, the carbon will be stored in the lumber rather than in the forest, where it can be subject to bug infestations, forest fires, and so on. But the data shows that they're completely wrong. The
Hmm.
science that I've looked at, and they have scientists, even some at Yale, who will support their point of view.
Right. Of
Um,
course, yeah, that hit close to home. I was reading that and I was like, uh-oh. Because
so,
of course, this is a Yale podcast. And so I was like, what? Even the Yale Forestry School is saying that? And so that was disappointing. But that I guess is part of it is people get easily swayed by scientific sounding papers, even if when you really get into it, the science isn't accurate.
well, there's a scientific basis for what the Yale academics are saying, but the science is changing. So,
Right.
whereas, years and years and years ago, it was thought that yes, it's best to transfer carbon to wood products. Um, but the science is changing. The IPCC just a few years ago just said that that's not true anymore. We don't believe that. We need to look at forests, look at protecting forests as an essential part of this whole solution. We need to address the climate. And um, it seems to me that the scientists need to catch up with the science.
Right. Yeah. Which, of course, I mean, just look at the last 100 years of the development of so many different sciences. Things change pretty quick. So it's tough. If you're a scientist, you got to be pretty quick moving.
Well, to be fair, this is a very new area of science. The whole climate, science is fairly new, but certainly
Yeah.
the forest aspect of this is extremely new. Scientists didn't really know until like 1990 how much carbon was being emitted by the logging we've been doing. And so a study from Oregon State University showed that it was really substantial and it's kind of evolved from there. Um, and today, the papers are just building on these themes that, we need to protect forests.
Right. Well, I'm curious also, I mean, just because it's kind of one of the things that some of us at the Forum on Religion Ecology have been thinking about lately is the idea of rights of nature. And do you think that might be a helpful framework at all? Because, of course, there's just so many situations around the planet where people have been giving rights to non-humans, seeing like the Ganges River, getting the rights as a person, and, forests, glaciers, mountains. Would that be helpful? Or are you thinking more like grassroots activism to protect the forest? Like, what's our best way in to facilitating more protection?
Well, there's certainly a lot of grassroots uh, energy put towards protecting forests for the climate. But when I think of um, the rights of nature, I also think about the rights of indigenous people. And
Right,
in this forest, indigenous people lived here for thousands and thousands of years and coexisted really well with nature, with forests. And the forests that we had when white settlers came were very much primeval, and that changed with the logging that occurred. When Weyerhaeuser and other timber companies decided to use forests as fodder for their own purposes. Um, so the rights of indigenous people is in this book is really foremost, um, especially given the fact that these forests were stolen from
right,
from the dozens and dozens of tribes who lived here when white settlers came in the 1800s. As far as the rights of nature, I'm not a big expert on that subject, but I'm a good listener, so
right,
um, I'm eager to learn more. But I do have the sense that the nature here has a purpose, and we need to be in tune with what it's saying, what it's telling us.
right, right. Well, and I do appreciate the way that you foreground indigenous communities throughout the book. And of course, that's a big deal with everything we do at the forum is looking, of course, at all the world's religions, but the earliest religious traditions are our indigenous traditions. And they have been such effective stewards of the land in so many ways for so many centuries and millennia. So I really appreciate that. It's a good environmental justice point because if we gave proper rights to the indigenous people, that are inhabiting these forests, then we don't necessarily need to appeal to rights of nature necessarily. Like the rights of indigenous people would be enough. I'm curious, especially after some of the fires here in California, the state has been doing a better job at consulting indigenous communities for forest management, including things like controlled burns and that kind of stuff. So I wonder, is that happening in other places, like in Oregon? Is there more partnership where fire management is collaborating with indigenous communities? We're doing that a little in Northern California, not much as I'd like, but a little.
So our book does not get into the fire issue as much as it needs to be addressed. So, but I've been working on subsequent articles with Jessica on fire,
Oh,
and
nice.
it's clear to me that forests need fire. I
Right.
mean, these forests evolve with fire. The rub is when people started moving into the forest and building their nice homes at the edge of the forest or in the forest, and then, of course, bitterly complain, rightly so, I suppose, that they're being pushed out by the oncoming wildfires. Um, the response by the federal government, the Forest Service, to wildfire is really a huge issue
Hmm.
that needs to be addressed. Their idea is that they can thin the forest and reduce the fuel in the forest. And my research thus far shows that that is not how you can protect communities.
Hmm.
Um, you can't, thinning a forest will not prevent the fires that do the most damage, which are driven
Hmm.
by wind. They're driven by severe weather. And especially in California, you have the Diablo winds that come out of the Bay Area, the um, other winds that in the Southern California that drive all these wildfires that are doing so much damage. Um, the best way to protect yourself and your community from these fires is harden your homes. You
Hmm.
know, there are many things have been written about how to do that, and we don't really need to go into that right now. But
Right.
you know, getting rid of the wooden shake roof that you have and replace it with something that is more fire resistant is just one of the many things you can do to protect yourself from a fire. Asking the Forest Service to thin the forest is not one of them. I mean,
Hmm.
um,
Interesting.
it'll just satisfy the needs of maybe the timber industry, but it won't protect you at all.
Right. Yeah. Especially from these kind of mega fires that are fueled by these intense winds, by the warming climate. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it was almost impossible. I live on a farm just, like 20 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge, and getting a place here was almost impossible to get fire insurance for, but it was like required for the mortgage. Like you got to find fire insurance. And I was just calling like every insurance company in the world, and they're like, "Oh no." And finally found
And it's gonna, if you
somebody.
can get it, it's gonna be expensive, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like getting flood insurance in Florida.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty impossible. And so yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, our governor, Gavin Newsom, here in California, has been pretty clear that the wildfires, he's like, this is climate change. It's not just a
Mhm.
question of needing to thin the forests and things like that. It's a question of learning to respond to climate change. Although protecting forests isn't always his first and foremost issue. I appreciate the way you bring up governments across all of the places that this temperate rainforest traverses. It's such a just wonderful web that you weave between science, between the timber industry, between governance, jurisprudence, and then just the activism and advocacy to want to protect forests, and then bring in environmental justice with indigenous communities. On that note, I'm curious. Obviously you're a journalist, you're a writer. Do you see yourself also as an activist, like a writer slash activist?
I'm an activist in the sense that I'm a citizen of this planet, and
Mm.
I care about forests. I love forests. I care about the environment because I live in the environment.
Right.
Um, so I guess I'm biased in favor of keeping living things alive and staying alive myself. And um, forests are a part of life, and
Mhm.
it's hard to say. Well, I'm not sure if I how to be neutral about forests. I mean, no, yeah, I'm clearly biased in favor of forests being there for humanity and for also all forms of life. I mean, we need
Right.
forests.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And one of the reasons, going back to something I said really early on, is it's one of the reasons I'm very jealous of folks like yourself who are out there doing journalism, is I feel like that's such a great way to participate in um, ways of supporting and propagating activism and advocacy. And obviously, academia is too, and grassroots activism, all kinds of things. But the figure of the kind of writer activist really fascinates me. And of course, again, you have these wonderful endorsements from folks like Elizabeth Colbert and Bill McKibben, and they're so good at that, about bringing writing to the fore in a way where it's promoting a good cause.
Well,
And
you can be you can be a journalist and still support protecting the environment. What you need to do though is stick to the facts and
mhm,
not every solution that the environmental community comes up with makes sense or is valid or is scientifically or mathematically
right.
accurate. And so you have to um, keep your senses about you and not be swayed by um, hyperbole. And there's a lot of that around.
Right. Well, on that note, I'm curious, I try to keep up with scientific literature around the environment or climate change. How do you parse some of these things? How are you keeping up with the science? I don't have my background's like in philosophy and religious studies, so I always find it a little difficult to kind of detect bad science. Like if I see a graph, I'm like, oh, that seems right. I'm kind of dumb about science. So, is there some trick to keeping up with the science like that?
I guess for me, I mean, I started out in college as a math major and took high
Oh,
level graduate courses in physics and in math. And so I came at journalism from that kind of a background, and I have a great appreciation for science for proving what you can prove
yeah.
and or debunking what you can debunk. So I think that I my methodology is simply to read the papers, talk to the scientists. I interview the
Right.
scientists on both sides if they'll talk to me, and they sometimes they don't. Um, but that's my goal, and hopefully to use the techniques of good journalism to get at what's happening and report the facts. And and when I have an opinion and it's valid, I will state it, and it's
Right.
based on fact,
Right.
certainly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And a good point. It's like, yeah, read the articles, keep up with the journals, but also talk to the scientists directly when they'll
Hmm.
talk to you.
When they'll talk to me, being a journalist, it gives me kind of a reason to call them up and shoot them a question or two, and they'll
Right.
often feel obliged, not always, but sometimes, many times, they'll feel obliged to engage. And and scientists like to engage. They like to be challenged because they think they have a winning argument or a winning point of view, and they want to champion that. And certainly love to hear them do so. That's just part of what I did. Part of my job is to listen to people and to weigh the facts from all sides. And
Right.
on this issue, on the forest issue, on climate, I feel like I'm coming down on the side of very well established fact.
Hmm.
The arguments from the timber industry to log as a climate solution, or the evidence behind that is paper thin. It really
Mhm.
is.
Yeah, right. And do you think some of the time it's paper thin and they know it's bad science? Or
Hmm.
like, these maybe aren't good faith arguments they're putting forward. They know they're just trying to help the industry. Or do they really believe that their scientific arguments are that good? Are they
Well,
being manipulated by the industry?
no, they're not dumb at all. I mean, they know what they're saying, and they know which side of the bread is being buttered and who's buttering it,
Right.
and they are clever at crafting arguments that appeal to their um, overlords. I guess that's one way of putting it.
Yeah, that's not a bad way to put it. I don't know if they'd like hearing that term.
I mean, some of the things I've read from these academics are just so off the wall, ridiculously wrong that, I have to also say, well, do they really realize what they're saying? It's just completely stupid.
Yeah.
But um, you know, for the most part, many of the papers I read are skewed in some way that come from the industry, but they're
Hmm.
skewed in subtle ways that um, things are omitted, evidence is omitted. They don't look at other things. So, it's a number of things that they go through that help them reach conclusions that just aren't all that strong and well supported.
Well, I'm also curious, speaking of how many scientists you interviewed for this book, when you're talking to them, how much do you hear a sense of a commitment to the ethical value of forests, for instance, a moral value of forests, or for that matter, of course, this is a religion podcast. Do you get much of a sense of a spiritual connection? Because, of course, a lot of great scientists do still have a religious or a spiritual connection to the universe or to nature. Sometimes they don't publish that in their papers necessarily, but it's there, and they realize that the environmental crisis is not just a technical crisis or a policy crisis, it is also a moral or maybe spiritual crisis. Do you kind of hear that a little bit from them?
I hear that a lot actually, and
Good.
it comes out. They care. They care. They've devoted their life work to this issue, to protecting forests, and the reason they do that is because they care about them and they realize how valuable they are in all of our lives.
Right.
And so, it's not a difficult choice for them to make, and it's solid. They're solid people. They care.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I think we're still living in a kind of scientific paradigm that doesn't want to admit that people have hearts and souls. And there still is this idea of just scientific objectivity and neutrality. And so scientists don't often get to bring their ethics or their spirituality into their work but then privately in a conversation, you really hear it.
I would say the same goes with journalists too. We do care,
Hmm.
and
Right.
this affects us in deeply personal life and death way.
Yeah.
What happens to a forest? What happens to the planet?
Yeah, right. And yeah, now's not a time to pretend to be a neutral observer and just like, oh, I'm just saying the facts. I'm neutral, unbiased. Like, it's okay to have some biases when you're protecting the future of life on Earth.
Well, there's no way to do anything as a journalist without having some kind of bias. For example,
Right.
do you know any crime reporters that are neutral on the fact of whether murder is a good or a bad thing?
That's a good example.
Or how would they feel about getting robbed at gunpoint? So,
Right.
there are, we're people. We have feelings and needs.
Yeah. That's a good. I got to remember that. That's a really good analogy. Uh, yeah, then the pretense to unbiased perspective goes out the window immediately.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's okay to admit that, yeah, you have feelings, you're a human being, you live on Earth. Those are okay things to admit.
Mhm.
Well, I'm curious, clearly, this is a wonderful book and so well researched. And I also have to say to anybody listening or viewing this, it also has a wonderful narrative structure to it, of the
Thank
way
you.
you kind of move from the south to the north, and you move throughout time as well. So space and time, it has a really nice narrative structure. So what I've read of it, haven't finished it yet, but it flows really well. Beautiful text, highly recommend it. Also, what's next? I mean, of course, still keep promoting this, keep telling people about proforestation, my favorite new word.
Hmm.
But do you have something new on the horizon? You got some more research that you're working on?
Well, I am not done by any means. I've been working on more stories that could eventually find themselves in a new book.
Nice.
Should I have the energy to write? You know, writing a book is a lot of work. This one took
Yeah.
5 years.
Oh, wow.
And we started out, Jessica and I started out in 2018 with a trip to Southeast Alaska to write about what Trump was doing in the forests up there.
Right.
And one thing led to another. We realized that we had a book, and we just simply, it was an adventure. We just pursued it. So I appreciate your kind words about the narrative structure. And each chapter, we try to tell a story, not just in part just cold, dry facts and scientific studies and so on.
Yeah.
There are people in each chapter, and it was fun writing about them.
Yeah. It's certainly an inspiring kind of writing for me. Because, I have such a dry academic background, and that sometimes I forget, tell a story. It can connect more.
Tell
It
a
brings it
story,
home. Yeah.
put some action in there, make people do something, whatever, that people will find that interesting.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a lot more compelling. And yeah, so interesting that it started in 2018, because then obviously 2020 with COVID, did that impact the research and the writing in any way?
Oh, absolutely did. For example, in fact, we had a scheduled trip to Vancouver Island in British Columbia,
Huh.
and I'm going to say April of 2020,
Oh,
just as the COVID thing was, full blown. Um, and we had it all lined up. We had a professor or an academic up there in British Columbia who's going to give us a tour of the forest on Vancouver Island. But when we came to go, we learned that the island was completely closed. There was no way to get there. We couldn't even swim across the
oh
channel.
no.
All the ferries were closed, all the flights were canceled, and we had to do the reporting for that one chapter remotely, which we could do because there were so many activists up there in British Columbia who were taking videos and were really,
Hmm.
really happy to talk to us. And I had been up there also was familiar with the territory, so I had a good understanding, a good feel for what the landscape looked like, and I was able to write it from home, based on my on their phone, on the computer reporting, also
Right.
reading studies, so that helped.
Right. Yeah. Tough time to be in the middle of a book. Um, and then, just also a note about Jessica Applegate, your co-author.
Yeah,
Where's she based? Also in Oregon?
she is based like me in Portland.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
she is by training, she's an educator. She works in early childhood education and has a full-time job in that field. I'm a full-time journalist, so I'm free to spend more time talking to people like you about the book.
Right.
But for someone who just came into this field of writing a book, doing research on journalism, she did an amazing job and caught right on. And a strong writer, has a strong history and background in environmental work.
Hmm.
She spearheaded a campaign in the mid 2020, no, around 2016, I guess,
Hmm.
um, to improve the air quality in Portland, which had
Hmm.
been compromised by industrial pollution. And she actually led a campaign that changed the law to strengthen air regulations in our state. So she is
Nice.
quite a committed person to the environment, and turned out she's a great writer.
That's great. That's inspiring to me for sure. And yeah, whatever the two of you have, there's clearly a great chemistry in the writing because it's just an eminently readable text about things that get pretty complicated. But
Yeah.
you drive it home in a clear and compelling way. So yeah, really, really
Thank you
great
so
work.
much.
Yeah, well, hey,
Thank you.
thank you. I didn't have to write it. It is a lot of work.
Well, 5 years
And
of my life, but well worth it. Well worth it. Believe me.
yeah, because it's such an important issue and like we were saying earlier, it just hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. And this forest in particular hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves. It still doesn't have the name that it deserves. So yeah,
Well,
so important.
maybe we can come up with a name, and maybe someone in your audience has an idea. So, I'm throwing it out there to see what might happen.
Yeah, I like that, right? Yeah, if anybody's watching this on YouTube, get in the comments there and try to drop a name. I'd like to have a naming contest and there's like a prize for the best name.
I would love that. If anybody wants to come up with a name um, or a contest to name it, I'd be delighted.
Yeah, because so much really depends upon being able to say what something is. And if you can't get the names right, that's an old thing from Confucianism, right? Confucius talks about the rectification of names. Like before we do anything morally or politically, we gotta get the words right. So even naming the rainforest would be immensely helpful,
The first thing we do with babies is we give them a name.
right?
I mean, it's so much easier to love something and cherish it and value it if you know the name.
Yeah. Yep. I appreciate that. I know some farmers who will name the animals that they slaughter, and they're like, I still want to love the animal. Yes, I will slaughter it and eat it, but I'm going to treat it with love while it's alive, so I will give it a name. And other people are like, no, don't name them. Don't care about them. It's just meat. Like, give it a name, show it some love. So yeah, hopefully we'll get the word out and we'll get a name for it. But aside from that, another great word is proforestation. So really appreciate you kind of bringing that into public awareness as well.
Yes, thank you.
Well, all right. I feel like we're just scratching the surface because you have such a breadth and depth of knowledge and experience in this area. So I think when you're working on some new stuff again in the future, and we'll have to chat again because we're just scratching the surface.
I would love to. It's been great meeting you and talking to you about my book and Jessica's book and Forrest.
Yeah, it's been a treat for me for sure, and it's just one of the best things about hosting this podcast, which wasn't my idea. It was the other people, the Forum on Religion Ecology. They were like, "Hey, Sam, do a podcast." I was like, "I don't know anything about that," and gave it a try, and it's been such a great excuse to talk to amazing people doing amazing work. So yeah, this has
It
absolutely been a treat.
sounds like fun. Well, for me too. So thank you.
Well, here's a way that I like to end the podcast, at least sometimes, is to ask the guest to give us a word to just take us out. And of course, a word can be hard, especially some of us are very wordy people, academics, writers, etc. We often have lots of words. So a phrase is good too, but just a word or a phrase, and that will be the last word for this episode. So,
our book is about protecting forests, and protecting forests is a solution, an important, essential solution to the climate. But to protect a forest, you have to work at it every day. That's what we're up against. I mean, it's hard work. But if you want to liquidate a forest, you only have to do it once.